The flames licked at the night sky, painting the ancient cobblestones in dancing amber light. Lord Damien Blackwood stood motionless on the cathedral rooftop, his tall figure silhouetted against the full moon like a gargoyle come to life. Below him, the spectacle of human cruelty unfolded with predictable savagery. The witch-burning had drawn half of Ravenshire from their homes, their faces alight with a peculiar mixture of righteous fervour and base entertainment. 500 years of existence had taught Damien that humanity's appetite for suffering remained constant through the ages. Only the justifications changed. Tonight, 7 women and 2 men stood bound to stakes in the town square. Most were already dead, their screams having faded minutes ago, but one figure remained eerily silent. A slender woman with hair the color of midnight that cascaded down her back, despite the prison shears that had attempted to rob her of it. Unlike the others, she hadn't struggled against her bonds or pleaded for mercy. She simply stared into the flames as they crept closer, her expression unreadable from this distance. Something about her composure stirred Damien's curiosity. A rare sensation for one who had witnessed centuries of human drama without intervention. "Are you planning to feed on the crowd's emotions tonight, my lord?" The silky voice belonged to Elias, his oldest companion, who materialized from the shadows. "Their bloodlust is particularly potent." Damien inhaled deeply, sampling the air. Indeed, the psychic miasma rising from the mob carried intoxicating notes of excitement, fear, and primitive satisfaction, a heady mixture that could sustain a vampire for weeks without the need for blood. "The emotional feast doesn't interest me," Damien replied, his gaze fixed on the silent woman. The flames had nearly reached her bare feet. "Tell me, who is she?" "The one who doesn't scream." Elias followed his master's gaze. "Ah, the mysterious one, brought in yesterday with the others, no name given. They say she was found practicing forbidden arts in the Thornwood. The magistrate declared her a witch after she refused to speak during interrogation." "Refused to speak or couldn't?" Damien mused. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest approximation to a smile he'd displayed in decades. Humans were so quick to condemn what they didn't understand. He'd witnessed countless innocents burned, hanged, or drowned for the crime of being different, eccentric, or merely inconvenient to the powerful. A sudden breeze carried her scent to him. Petrichor and something else. Something ancient and familiar that he couldn't immediately place. Not entirely human, that much was certain. Below, the flames finally touched her skin. Still, she made no sound, but Damien caught the infinitesimal tightening of her jaw. Her eyes, reflecting the fire, locked onto something in the crowd. Damien tracked her gaze to a hooded figure standing apart from the bloodthirsty mob, watching with cold calculation rather than zealous fervor. In that moment, the woman at the stake looked upward, directly at Damien, as though she'd sensed his presence all along. Their eyes met across the impossible distance, hers a startling violet, a color no human possessed. Without conscious decision, Damien found himself moving. Centuries of calculated survival abandoned in an instant of inexplicable compulsion. He dropped from the cathedral roof, his supernatural speed rendering him nearly invisible as he swept through the crowd. Humans sensed only a cold wind as he passed, their primitive instincts registering danger without their conscious minds understanding why. Some stepped back, crossing themselves reflexively. Damien reached the pyre as the flames began to consume the woman's dress. In one fluid motion, he snapped the iron chains binding her and gathered her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, her body tense but not resisting. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by screams of "Demon!" and "The devil comes for his own!" The hooded figure she had been watching slipped away, moving with unnatural quickness through the chaos. Damien leapt, his power propelling them high above the square, beyond the reach of pitchforks and muskets. The woman in his arms neither struggled nor showed fear, only studied his face with those impossible violet eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice a melodic whisper that carried clearly despite the wind rushing past them. Before he could answer, a musket ball whizzed by his head, reminding him that while ordinary weapons posed little threat to him, his unexpected burden was considerably more vulnerable. He tightened his grip and raced across the rooftops of Ravenshire, away from the madness below. Only when they reached the safety of the ancient forest beyond the town did he set her down. She immediately stepped away, establishing distance between them. Despite her ordeal, she stood straight, her dignity intact despite her scorched dress and the angry red marks on her ankles where the flames had kissed her skin. "You've made a grave mistake, vampire," she said, her voice stronger now. "Though I thank you for sparing me a painful death. You know what I am. It wasn't a question. Just as you sensed I'm not entirely what I appear to be." She pushed her singed hair back, revealing elegantly pointed ears that confirmed his suspicion. "Though I didn't expect the legendary Alpha of the Northern Territories to personally intervene in a human witch trial." Damien studied her more carefully, half-elven he guessed, noting the subtle luminescence of her skin beneath the grime and soot. The elven bloodlines had become vanishingly rare in this realm after the Great Purge 3 centuries ago. "You have me at a disadvantage," he said. "You know who I am, yet I don't even know your name." A smile played at the corners of her mouth, transforming her face from merely striking to breathtaking. "I am called Lyra. The rest of my identity would only complicate matters between us." "We have no matters between us," Damien replied coolly. "I acted on impulse, a rarity for me and likely a mistake, as you said." "Then I am free to go," Lyra challenged, though she made no move to leave. Damien arched an eyebrow. "Into the forest, barefoot and half-burned? The humans will be hunting for both of us by dawn, and these woods harbor dangers even I treat with caution." She glanced toward the trees, which seemed to shift and murmur with more than just wind. "I am not without resources," she said, but swayed slightly, betraying her exhaustion. "You need treatment for those burns," Damien said more gently, "and rest. My estate lies beyond this forest. You'll be safe there until you recover." "Safe in the lair of the Alpha vampire?" Lyra laughed, a sound like crystal bells. "How many have walked willingly into your domain and lived to speak of its wonders?" "More than you might imagine," he responded dryly. "I don't make a habit of slaughtering guests. Just feeding on them, then?" She raised her chin defiantly, but her eyes betrayed a flash of very rational fear. "I haven't survived 5 centuries by succumbing to base impulses," Damien said. "My household maintains blood stores, freely given by willing donors. Your veins are safe from my fangs, half-elf." The forest grew eerily silent around them. Even the night creatures seemed to be holding their breath, waiting. "Very well," Lyra finally conceded. "I accept your hospitality, Lord Blackwood, but only until my strength returns." "Agreed." He offered his cloak, which she accepted with a graceful nod. As she pulled it around her shoulders, Damien caught another whiff of that strange, familiar scent that clung to her beneath the smoke and fear. It stirred ancient memories, unpleasant ones. The journey to Blackwood Estate took less than an hour, even at a pace comfortable for Lyra. The mansion materialized from the mist like a leviathan rising from the deep, all black stone and Gothic spires, windows gleaming with warm light despite the late hour. Lyra stopped at the wrought-iron gates, her expression unreadable as she studied the crest worked into the metalwork, a raven perched atop a chalice, surrounded by ancient runes. "Second thoughts?" Damien asked. "No," she said softly, "merely remembering stories." The gates opened silently at Damien's approach. Servants materialized as they entered the grand foyer, some human, others clearly not. None showed surprise at their master returning with a bedraggled woman smelling of smoke and magic. "Prepare the blue guest chamber," Damien instructed an elderly woman who carried herself with the dignity of a duchess, "and bring healing salves, clean clothing and food." "Yes, my lord." The woman bowed and disappeared up the sweeping staircase. "Mrs. Harlow has managed my household for 30 years, Damien explained. "She'll see to your needs." Lyra nodded, her eyes darting from the vaulted ceilings to the ancient tapestries depicting battles long forgotten by human history. She lingered on one showing fair-haired beings with pointed ears standing alongside vampires against a dark army. "The Concordat of 7 realms," she murmured. "I didn't know any depictions survived the burning times." "You know your history," Damien remarked, surprised. "Few remembered the ancient alliance between vampires and elves." "Some histories are preserved in places humans cannot reach," she replied cryptically. Before he could press further, Mrs. Harlow reappeared. "Your chamber is ready, miss, if you'll follow me." Lyra turned to Damien. "Thank you for your mercy tonight, Lord Blackwood. However mysterious your motives, rest," he replied simply. "We'll speak again when you've recovered." He watched her ascend the stairs, noting how she moved with unconscious grace, despite her injuries and exhaustion. Something about this woman disrupted his carefully maintained equanimity. 5 centuries had taught him to trust his instincts, and every fibre of his being whispered that Lyra was far more than a half-elven woman caught in a witch hunt. As if sensing his thoughts, she paused at the top of the stairs and looked back, her violet eyes luminous in the candlelight. Then she disappeared down the corridor, leaving Damien with the unsettling feeling that he'd invited chaos into his ordered existence. "She bears watching, that one," came Elias's voice from the shadows. "Her aura carries old magic." "Have Sebastian research witch trials in the surrounding counties," Damien instructed. "I want to know where she came from and why she was really in Ravenshire. You suspect she was there for a purpose beyond bad luck." "Nothing about her speaks of bad luck or coincidence," Damien replied. "And did you notice the hooded figure watching her, the one who slipped away when I took her?" Elias nodded. "I did, moving too quickly for a human. Find out who it was." After Elias departed, Damien retired to his study. He poured a glass of blood wine, a rare vintage infused with the essence of its willing donor's emotions, and stood before the massive windows overlooking the mist-shrouded grounds. Something about Lyra's scent continued to trouble him, stirring memories from the darkest period of his existence, the time before he became Alpha, when the vampire clans warred among themselves and with the elven kingdoms, before the Concordat, before the betrayal. A soft knock interrupted his brooding. Sebastian, his archivist, entered with an ancient leather-bound volume. "My lord, I thought you should see this immediately." The scholarly vampire looked uncharacteristically disturbed as he laid the book open on Damien's desk. "The woman you rescued, I noticed her eyes." "Violet," Damien said. "A trait of the high elven bloodlines." "Yes, but specifically of one bloodline." Sebastian pointed to an illuminated family tree. "The House of Moonshadow." Damien felt a cold shock of recognition. The House of Moonshadow, the royal family who had led the elven betrayal that resulted in the slaughter of his clan 3 centuries ago. The family whose patriarch, Lord Asriel Moonshadow, had personally driven a blade of enchanted silver through Damien's heart before declaring the Concordat broken. The same Lord Asriel who still led the Elven High Council in their hidden realm, and who had sworn an eternal blood oath to exterminate Damien's bloodline. "It's impossible," Damien whispered. "The Moonshadows sealed their realm after the betrayal. None have walked among humans for centuries." "Nevertheless," Sebastian said gravely, "if her eyes are truly that shade of violet, she can only be of Moonshadow blood, possibly even direct lineage." A terrible suspicion formed in Damien's mind. The hooded figure at the witch burning, the way Lyra had looked at them, the familiar scent that clung to her beneath the smoke and fear. "Asriel," he breathed. "The scent is Asriel's." Damien moved with preternatural speed to the guest wing, Lyra's chamber door splintering beneath his hand. The room was empty, the bed untouched. The window stood open, curtains billowing in the night breeze. On the pillow lay a single object, a small silver amulet bearing the moon shadow crest, a crescent moon encircling a star. Beneath it was a note in elegant, flowing script. The daughter thanks the enemy for his unwitting assistance. The father awaits the next move in our ancient game. Damien crushed the note in his fist, a cold rage building inside him. After 3 centuries of nursing his wounds and rebuilding his power, he had inadvertently revealed himself by saving the daughter of his greatest enemy, a woman who had clearly been placed in that witch trial as bait. The question was, had she been bait for him specifically, or merely any vampire who might reveal themselves? And why break centuries of isolation to set such a trap now? Outside, a wolf howled, too close to be natural, too melodic to be ordinary, an elven skinwalker sending a message. The game that had nearly destroyed him 3 centuries ago had begun anew. And somewhere in the mist, beyond his domain, Lyra Moonshadow was returning to her father with information about the vampire who had mysteriously saved her from the flames. Part 2. Dawn crept reluctantly over Blackwood Estate, grey light filtering through persistent mist that clung to the ancient grounds like a shroud. Damien stood motionless on the balcony outside his private chambers, eyes fixed on the forest boundary where Lyra had disappeared. The silver moonshadow amulet hung from his fingers, occasionally catching what little light penetrated the gloom. "You should destroy it," Elias said from the doorway. "Moonshadow artifacts are notoriously enchanted. It could be tracking your movements even now." Damien closed his fingers around the amulet. "That's precisely why I'm keeping it. If Azriel wants to know where I am, I'll save him the trouble of searching. A dangerous game, my lord." "One I didn't choose to play," Damien replied, his voice hardening. "But if Azriel Moonshadow wishes to resurrect old conflicts, I'll not cower in the shadows." He turned from the balcony, crossing his chamber to a particular tapestry, one depicting not battles or alliances, but a serene woodland scene. With practiced precision, he pressed 3 specific leaves in the woven pattern. A soft click preceded the tapestry sliding aside to reveal a hidden chamber. Inside waited Sebastian, surrounded by maps, ancient texts, and a peculiar arrangement of crystals pulsing with soft blue light. "The Moonshadow contingent has crossed the boundary at Thornwood," Sebastian reported without preamble. "Our sentries tracked them to the ancient stone circle, then lost them. Presumably they used a portal." Damien nodded. The elven ability to create temporary gateways between realms had always given them tactical advantages. "And the witch trial victims?" "All dead before our intervention," Sebastian confirmed. "Local records show the accusations began 3 weeks ago, precisely when our sources reported unusual activity near the realm boundaries." "Setting the stage," Damien mused. "Creating a spectacle guaranteed to draw attention. But why target me specifically?" He set the amulet down amid the crystals, which flared briefly in response. "Because you're the last," came a new voice from the doorway. Damien turned sharply. Isabella Devereux stood in the entrance, her crimson dress a stark contrast to her alabaster skin. Though technically his progeny, created 4 centuries ago, she had long since established her independence, becoming one of the most powerful vampire diplomats in the Western Territories. "Isabella," Damien acknowledged with a slight inclination of his head. "Your presence suggests this situation has broader implications than I anticipated." She swept into the room, the scent of sandalwood and blood following her. "The Conclave sent me as soon as word reached us of elven activity in your territory. Had I known you'd personally intervene in a human witch trial, I would have arrived sooner." "How did the Conclave learn of this so quickly?" Elias asked, suspicion evident in his tone. Isabella's smile was cold. "We've been monitoring unusual patterns for months, elven sightings across 3 territories, whispers of movement within their sealed realm, ancient portals reactivating after centuries of dormancy." She fixed her gaze on Damien. "And very specific inquiries about the surviving bloodline of the Northern Alpha." Damien's expression remained impassive, but his mind raced. The vampire conclave operated as both governing body and intelligence network for their kind. If they were concerned enough to send Isabella, the situation was far graver than a mere rekindling of his personal feud with Azrael Moonshadow. "What aren't you telling me, Isabella?" he asked quietly. She moved to the crystal arrangement, studying the pulsing lights. "The Elven High Council has undergone significant changes. Azrael's position has been challenged for the first time in centuries." "By whom?" "His daughter." Damien went utterly still. "Lyra?" Isabella laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "No, his elder daughter Seraphina, the heir apparent." She traced a finger over one of the maps. "Lyra is his youngest, the half-blood princess, result of Azrael's brief dalliance with a human woman, a source of shame he kept hidden for decades." The pieces began to shift in Damien's mind, forming a new and more complex pattern. "She's not just bait, she's a pawn in an internal power struggle." "Precisely," Isabella confirmed. "Seraphina advocates for elven isolation, continuing the policies established after the betrayal. She believes interaction with other realms weakens their bloodlines and compromises their security. While Azrael," Damien prompted, "has apparently had a change of heart after centuries of seclusion. He now seeks to rebuild certain alliances, specifically with vampire clans. The Conclave has received overtures from his emissaries." Elias hissed in disbelief. "After what they did? After the blood oath he personally swore?" Isabella's expression grew somber. "Something has frightened him, Damien. Something significant enough to make him risk civil war within his own realm to seek out his oldest enemy." Sebastian cleared his throat. "If I may, my lord, the chronicles mention a prophecy. When the veil between realms grows thin, old enemies must stand as kin." "Obscure folklore," Elias dismissed. "Perhaps," Sebastian conceded. "But there's more. The elven histories in our archives reference a cyclical threat, something that emerges every millennium, something that predates both our kinds." Damien returned to the balcony, his mind processing these revelations. The morning mist had begun to retreat, revealing the true extent of his domain, stretching to mountains in the distance. Mountains that marked the ancient boundary between vampire territories and the hidden elven realm. "The witch hunt was a test," he said finally. "Azrael needed to confirm my location, assess my power, and determine my disposition after centuries apart. Would I ignore the suffering of innocence, intervene for blood sport, or show mercy? And you played directly into his hands by saving his daughter," Isabella observed, though without criticism. "Perhaps," Damien conceded. "Though I wonder if Lyra's role in this drama is quite as simple as any of us believe." He recalled the way she had looked at him as they fled across the rooftops. No fear, despite being in the arms of her people's greatest enemy. No gratitude either, merely assessment, the eyes of someone gathering intelligence. "What will you do?" Isabella asked. Damien slipped the Moonshadow amulet into his pocket. "Spring the trap, of course. If Azrael wants my attention, he has it." "The Conclave advises caution," Isabella warned. "This situation extends beyond your personal vendetta." "I'm aware," Damien replied coldly. "But I will not be manipulated, nor will I ignore the first significant movement from the Elven realm in centuries." He turned to his advisors. "Sebastian, prepare the library archives. I want everything we have on elven portal magic and the millennial cycles. Elias, double the perimeter guards and activate the blood wards around the estate." To Isabella, he said, "Tell your masters at the Conclave that I will handle this situation with appropriate discretion, but I will not stand idle while Azrael Moonshadow plays his games." Isabella studied him for a long moment before inclining her head. "As you wish, but I'm staying. The Conclave wants direct observation." "Fine. But remember whose territory you stand in." As his advisors departed to execute his commands, Damien remained on the balcony, his enhanced senses scanning the boundary where forest met mountain. Something moved at the edge of his perception, too deliberate to be wildlife, too swift to be human. He smiled grimly. The watchers were already in place. 3 days passed without incident, though the tension at Blackwood Estate grew increasingly palpable. The human servants whispered about strange lights in the forest. The night guard reported hearing voices, speaking in ancient languages among the trees. Even the local animals behaved oddly, birds roosting in unnatural silence, deer standing sentinel-like at the forest edge. Damien immersed himself in the archives, poring over accounts of the time before the betrayal. Much had been lost in the subsequent wars, but fragments remained: treaties, personal journals, diplomatic correspondence. Most notably, a partial transcript of the original Concordat of 7 Realms, signed by his ancestor Alaric Blackwood and Asriel's father, Thorn Moonshadow. One passage particularly drew his attention. And should the ancient darkness rise again, as foretold in the prophecy of 7 stars, the blood drinkers and the star children shall unite their powers as guardians of the mortal realm, standing between the darkness and all living beings. Flowery language for a political alliance, Isabella remarked, reading over his shoulder. Perhaps, Damien allowed. Or perhaps there was more substance to our ancestors' pact than mere territorial agreements. He closed the brittle parchment carefully. The elven histories refer to a great darkness that was sealed away eons ago, a threat so significant it united 7 distinct magical realms against it. Myths and legends, Isabella dismissed. All races have their apocalyptic stories. Yes, but how many of those myths result in actual political treaties that lasted for centuries? Sebastian countered, joining them with another armful of scrolls. And how many coincide with astronomical events that occur every millennium? He unrolled a star chart on the table. According to these calculations, we're approaching a celestial alignment identical to the one that occurred during the formation of the original Concordat. And again during the betrayal. Damien studied the chart, recognition dawning. The 7 stars, not a poetic flourish, but an actual astronomical event. Precisely, Sebastian confirmed. The alignment reaches its apex in 7 days. The implications hung heavily in the air. If the elven legends held any truth, if the Concordat was formed to combat something beyond their individual powers. We need more information, Damien decided. And there's only one source who might provide it. You can't seriously be considering meeting with Asriel, Isabella protested. It's clearly what he wants. To lure you out of your protected territory. Not Asriel, Damien corrected. Lyra. The stone circle in Thornwood stood silent and ancient, predating even Damien's long memory. 12 massive monoliths arranged in a perfect circle, covered in carvings worn smooth by millennia of weather. At its center lay a flat altar stone, upon which Damien had placed the Moonshadow amulet. He stood alone, having insisted that his companions remain at the estate despite their vehement protests. The risk was calculated. If Asriel wanted him dead, there were subtler methods than an ambush at an ancient power site known to both their kinds. The full moon rose, bathing the circle in silver light. The amulet began to glow in response, the crescent moon design seeming to lift from its surface. I didn't expect you to come alone. Damien turned to find Lyra standing between 2 of the monoliths. Gone were the scorched rags of the witch trial. She now wore flowing robes of midnight blue embroidered with silver runes, her black hair braided with moonstone beads that accentuated her pointed ears. A circlet of white gold sat upon her brow, marking her royal status. Nor did I expect you to answer my summons personally, Princess, he replied, deliberately using her title. I assumed your father would send guards to capture me. My father doesn't know I'm here. Lyra stepped into the circle, her movements fluid and graceful. The moonlight seemed to cling to her, illuminating her violet eyes. Which gives us very little time to speak freely. Then speak, Damien said, remaining perfectly still as she approached. Why the elaborate scheme? Why use yourself as bait in a human witch trial? Lyra circled him slowly, studying him with the same intense curiosity she'd shown during their first meeting, to see if the rumors were true, to determine if Damian Blackwood, the alpha who survived the betrayal, was still the same vampire who once stood as my people's ally. I was never your ally, he corrected coldly. The alliance was formed centuries before I was turned. Yet you upheld it faithfully, according to the histories. She stopped directly before him, until my father's treachery destroyed the peace between our kinds. You speak of your father's greatest crime with remarkable detachment. I wasn't born until a century after the betrayal, Lyra replied. I know it only from histories and whispered court gossip. The half-human princess isn't privy to the High Council's darkest secrets. Damian caught a flash of bitterness in her tone. Yet here you are, acting as your father's agent. Am I? She raised an eyebrow, a challenge in her expression. What makes you so certain of my allegiance? The note you left. The daughter thanks the enemy for his unwitting assistance. The father awaits the next move in our ancient game. Lyra's expression changed subtly. Surprise, quickly masked. I left no note. Damian studied her carefully, searching for signs of deception. He found none, though elves were notoriously difficult to read. If not you, then who? My sister, Lyra said grimly. Seraphina has her own agents within my father's court, including among those assigned to monitor my bait mission. The implications rippled through Damian's mind. A third player in the game. My sister desires isolation at any cost, Lyra confirmed. She believes the prophecies are merely stories used to manipulate policy. She would see all bridges burned rather than risk elven purity through alliance with vampires, while your father suddenly advocates reunion after centuries of sworn enmity, Damian observed. Forgive my skepticism, but Azriel Moonshadow drove an enchanted silver blade through my heart and slaughtered half my clan. His change of heart seems convenient. Fear is a powerful motivator, Lyra said quietly, even for those who have lived for millennia. And what does Azriel fear? Lyra glanced toward the sky, where stars glittered between wisps of cloud. 7 days from now, the 7 stars align. The veil between realms thins, and what was sealed away stirs once more. The ancient darkness from the prophecies. Not just darkness, Lyra corrected. The void, the absence of all magic, all life. It consumes everything it touches, not killing but erasing, removing from existence itself. Despite himself, Damian felt a chill. In his centuries of existence, he had encountered many magical threats, but nothing that matched this description. If this void is so terrible, why did your father break the Concordat? Why weaken our united defense? Lyra's expression grew troubled. That is what I came to discover for myself. The official histories claim the vampires violated the pact first, that your kind began feeding indiscriminately on elven children. A lie, Damian growled. We upheld every letter of the agreement. I believe you, Lyra said simply, which means my father's actions were motivated by something else or someone else. Something significant enough to risk eternal enmity with powerful allies on the eve of the millennial threat. The air around them seemed to grow colder as the implications settled. If Azriel had been manipulated or coerced into the betrayal. Time grows short, Lyra said, glancing at the position of the moon. My absence will be noticed soon. I came to warn you, and to offer an alliance separate from my father's overtures. Why should I trust any Moonshadow? Damian asked, though with less venom than he might have days ago. Because unlike my father and sister, I have no throne to protect, no ancient pride to preserve, Lyra answered. I am half-human, never fully accepted in either world. What I seek is truth and survival. She reached into her robes and withdrew a small crystal vial filled with silvery liquid. This contains my memories of what I've discovered in the restricted archives, records of the true events surrounding the betrayal. Take it, view it through the pensive I know you possess. Then decide whether to meet with my father." Damien accepted the vial cautiously. "And what do you want in return?" "Your word that regardless of what you decide about my father's proposal, you'll help me uncover who or what really orchestrated the betrayal." Her violet eyes held his with surprising intensity. "Someone manipulated our peoples into conflict at the exact moment when unity was most needed. 3 centuries later, the pattern repeats as the stars align once more." A sudden wind swept through the stone circle, carrying with it the scent of ozone and magic. The monoliths began to hum with energy, responding to some unseen power. "They've discovered my absence," Lyra said urgently. "I must return." "How do I contact you again?" Damien asked, pocketing the vial of memories. "You don't," she replied. "I'll find you when it's safe." She stepped back toward the monolith she'd emerged from, then hesitated. "Damien, trust no one in my father's court, not even me, until you've viewed those memories." The air between the stones shimmered, forming a translucent doorway through which Damien glimpsed a world of impossible beauty. Crystalline spires rising above ancient forests, illuminated by stars that seemed too bright, too close. Before stepping through, Lyra turned back one last time. The witch trial, my captivity, was real. My assignment was to be captured and observe which, if any, supernatural entities might intervene. But the danger was genuine. Had you not saved me, I would have burned. Why tell me this? Because unlike my family, I believe trust must begin somewhere. She offered a sad smile, even between enemies. With those words, she stepped through the portal. It collapsed behind her with a sound like shattering glass, leaving Damien alone in the moonlit circle. He stood motionless for several moments, the crystal vial heavy in his pocket, his mind working through the implications of this encounter. If Lyra spoke truth, the situation was far more complex than a simple resumption of ancient enmities. As he turned to leave, a soft sound from the trees caught his attention. Too deliberate for wildlife, too careful for a human. "You can emerge now," he called, his voice carrying in the night air. "I know you're there." For a moment, nothing moved. Then a figure stepped from the shadows, tall and elegant in form, with platinum hair that seemed to glow in the moonlight. Despite the centuries since their last encounter, Damien recognized him instantly. Asriel Moonshadow. The Elven High Lord's ageless face betrayed no emotion as he regarded his ancient enemy across the stone circle. "So," he said, his melodic voice carrying clearly despite its softness, "you've met my daughter." "Your spy, you mean," Damien corrected. "Is that what she told you?" Asriel's expression remained inscrutable. "How interesting." The air between them seemed to crackle with tension. 5 centuries of history, betrayal and bloodshed condensed into a single moment. 7 days, Damien Blackwood," Asriel said finally. "In 7 days I will come to your estate with a formal proposal. View my daughter's evidence if you wish. Form your opinions. But know this, what approaches is far worse than our petty grievances." "There was nothing petty about your blade in my heart," Damien replied coldly. For the briefest moment, something like regret flickered across Asriel's perfect features. "No, there wasn't." He turned as if to go, then paused. "She wasn't supposed to make direct contact with you. Lyra has always been willful. Like father, like daughter," Damien observed. "More than you know." With those cryptic words, Asriel melted back into the shadows, leaving no trace of his presence save a lingering scent of winter and starlight. Damien remained in the circle until dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. The moon shadow amulet on the altar stone had vanished, taken by Asriel presumably. In its place lay a single black feather with an iridescent sheen. A raven feather, his family's symbol. The message couldn't be clearer. Asriel had been watching him for some time, known his movements, his habits, perhaps even entered his estate undetected. As Damien finally departed the stone circle, The crystal vial of Lyra's memories seemed to pulse against his chest like a second heartbeat. 7 days until the stars aligned. 7 days to unravel centuries of deception. And somewhere in the shadows between them, an ancient threat stirred, hungry for both their kinds. The pensive chamber lay deep beneath Blackwood Estate, accessible only through a labyrinth of passages designed to disorient even supernatural visitors. Damien placed the crystal vial on a pedestal at the center of the circular room, surrounded by ancient runes carved into obsidian floors. The silvery liquid within caught the light, swirling hypnotically as if alive. Isabella watched from the doorway, her expression tight with disapproval. "You're placing extraordinary trust in Moonshadow information." "Not trust," Damien corrected. "Verification. Memory manipulation leaves traces even the most skilled cannot disguise completely. And if it's a trap, memory magic can be weaponized." Damien's smile was cold. "Why do you think I asked you to observe rather than experience it myself?" He poured the vial's contents into the shallow stone basin of the pensive. The liquid expanded upon contact, filling the basin with swirling silver mist that emitted a soft, pulsing light. The runes around the room began to glow in response, protective enchantments activating automatically. "I'll enter first," Damien said. "Wait 30 seconds, then follow. If I don't emerge within 10 minutes, activate the containment protocols." Without waiting for her response, he leaned forward and touched the surface of the swirling memories. The world dissolved around him. He materialized in a vast, circular chamber of living crystal, light refracting through translucent walls in rainbow patterns. The Elven High Council chamber, a place he'd visited only twice during the time of the Concordat. A place no vampire had seen in 3 centuries. Council members sat in tiered seats surrounding a central dais where Azrael Moonshadow stood, looking remarkably similar to his present appearance despite the scene clearly being centuries old. The memory's perspective placed Damien in a hidden alcove above the proceedings, Lyra's vantage point, he realized, as she spied on a meeting she had no official access to. "The alignment approaches, my lord," an elder councillor was saying. "Our seers report disturbances at the 7 anchor points. The seals weaken." "As they have every millennium," Azrael replied dismissively. "And as always, the combined power of the 7 realms will reinforce them." "If the 7 realms cooperate," another councillor interjected, "the vampires grow restless. Rumors suggest the Northern Alpha, Alaric Blackwood, questions the necessity of our alliance." Damien stiffened at the mention of his sire. This council meeting must have occurred shortly before the betrayal. "Alaric understands the threat," Azrael insisted. "He was present at the last renewal of the seals. He knows what failure would mean." The memory shifted suddenly, time passing in Lyra's recollection to show a smaller private chamber. Azrael sat alone at a desk of polished moonstone, examining ancient scrolls. The door opened silently, admitting a hooded figure who moved with unnatural grace. "Is it done?" Azrael asked without looking up. "Yes, my lord," the figure answered, lowering its hood to reveal feminine features of otherworldly beauty. "Seraphina," Damien realized with shock. But a younger Seraphina than should have been possible if Lyra had been born a century after the betrayal. "The evidence has been planted. Human witnesses have been persuaded to testify to vampire attacks on elven children." "And Alaric will find it," Azrael confirmed. "His investigators are already following the trail we created," Seraphina replied with cold satisfaction. "When confronted, he will deny everything, of course. His denials will only seem like the desperate lies of the guilty." Azrael's expression showed conflict. "The Concordat has maintained peace for millennia. To break it now, on the eve of the alignment—" "The Concordat weakens us," Seraphina said vehemently. "Dilutes our bloodlines, diminishes our power. The vampires are abominations, neither alive nor dead. The alliance was always a mistake." "And the seals?" Azrael challenged. "Without the combined power of the 7 realms, We don't need them, Seraphina interrupted. Our realm can be isolated, protected. Let the void consume the others if it must. Isabella appeared beside Damien in the memory, her eyes widening as she absorbed what they were witnessing. This contradicts every historical account of the betrayal, she whispered. The memory shifted again. This time, they stood in a forest clearing where two figures faced each other with open hostility. Alaric Blackwood, tall and imposing, with the same raven-black hair and sharp features Damien had inherited, confronted Asriel. "Explain these," Alaric demanded, throwing what appeared to be blood-stained elven garments at Asriel's feet. "Explain why my investigators found these hidden in my own territory, bearing the scent of my clan." "Can you deny they belong to your people?" Asriel countered. "They bear our scent, yes, but we did not." "Children, Alaric," Asriel cut him off, his voice brittle with controlled rage. "Elven children drained and discarded, the Concordate's primary law, broken." "We are being framed," Alaric insisted. "Think, Asriel. Why would we risk everything now, when the alignment approaches, when the seals must be renewed?" For a moment, uncertainty flickered across Asriel's face. Then his expression hardened. "Perhaps you believe your kind no longer needs the alliance. Perhaps you think yourselves powerful enough to withstand the void alone." "That's Seraphina's argument, not mine," Alaric shot back. "She has opposed the Concordate from the beginning. Have you considered that this evidence might be her doing?" Asriel's eyes flashed with anger. "You dare accuse my daughter of such treachery? I dare suggest you investigate before condemning allies who have stood with your people for millennia," Alaric responded, his voice steady despite his obvious anger. The memory blurred, and when it solidified again, they witnessed the moment of betrayal itself. A formal conclave of both races, called ostensibly to address the accusations. Dozens of vampires from Alaric's clan, unarmed as custom dictated, stood on one side of a vast ceremonial hall. The elven court stood opposite, their expressions grim. Damien felt Isabella tense beside him. "I've heard accounts of this day," she whispered. "But to see it..." Asriel stepped forward, a ceremonial silver blade in his hands, supposedly a symbol of truth-telling in joint conclaves. "Alaric Blackwood, you stand accused of violating the blood compact. How do you answer?" "We are innocent," Alaric replied formally, "and we demand the right of proving through the ancient rites." "There will be no right," Asriel declared. "The evidence is irrefutable." Without warning, he plunged the blade into Alaric's chest. In the same instant, hidden elven archers revealed themselves in the gallery above, raining enchanted arrows upon the stunned vampires. The memory grew chaotic, screams, blood, the flash of magic as the vampires belatedly tried to defend themselves. Through it all, Damien caught glimpses of Seraphina watching from a side chamber, satisfaction evident in her expression. And behind her, partially obscured in shadow, stood another figure. As the massacre continued, this observer stepped slightly forward, revealing features that made both Damien and Isabella gasp in shock. The figure was neither vampire nor elf, but something else entirely, humanoid in general shape, but with skin like polished obsidian that seemed to absorb rather than reflect light. Its eyes were void-like pools of absolute darkness, and around it, reality itself seemed to warp slightly, as if its very presence distorted the fabric of existence. "The void takes physical form," Isabella breathed. The memory shifted one final time. They now stood in what appeared to be a secret archive, where an older Lyra, closer to her current appearance, pored over ancient texts by mage light. Her fingers traced words in a language Damien recognized as Old Elven, a dialect extinct for millennia. "The 7 seals require 7 keys," she read aloud, translating for herself. 7 bloodlines, 7 powers, freely given in unity. Should the circle break, the void finds its entry. Should mistrust reign, darkness shall rule. She turned a page, revealing diagrams of the astronomical alignment they now faced, 7 specific stars forming a pattern around a central dark point. "The alignment creates a pathway," Lyra continued reading. The seals form the gate. Without renewal, the gate weakens. Without unity, the gate fails. Her fingers traced another passage, her expression growing increasingly troubled. The void seeks division. It whispers. It manipulates. It wears faces familiar and trusted. Its greatest weapon is not strength, but deception. The memory began to dissolve, the edges blurring as Lyra's recollection ended. The last clear image was of her finding a hidden compartment in the archive wall, withdrawing an ancient amulet identical to the one she'd left in Damien's chamber after her escape. Then darkness enveloped them, and Damien found himself back in the pensive chamber, Isabella beside him looking shaken. "The void entity," she said immediately. "It was there, watching the betrayal." "Not just watching," Damien corrected grimly. "Orchestrating. The question is whether Azriel knew he was being manipulated." He paced the circumference of the chamber, mind racing. The memory explains much, but raises more questions. If Seraphina was already an adult 3 centuries ago, why does Lyra believe she was born a century after the betrayal? And why would Azriel approach us now, after centuries of enmity? "Because the alignment comes again," Sebastian said from the doorway, where he'd apparently been waiting. "And this time, the seals have weakened for 300 years without renewal." Damien nodded slowly, bringing us to our current dilemma. Do we trust Azriel's overtures? Was he a willing participant in the betrayal, or another pawn of the void? "Those memories could be fabricated," Isabella warned, "altered to earn your sympathy." "Possible," Damien acknowledged, "but the presence of the void entity matches descriptions in our own archives too closely to be coincidental invention, and explain why Lyra would fabricate memories that implicate her own father in a betrayal, even if as an unwitting participant." Before Isabella could respond, a violent tremor shook the chamber. Dust rained from the ceiling as the entire foundation of Blackwood Estate seemed to shudder. "My lord!" Elias's voice called urgently through a communication crystal near the door. "We're under attack!" They rushed through the labyrinthine passages toward the surface, the tremors growing more intense with each passing moment. As they emerged into the main hall, a deafening crack split the air. The grand stained-glass window overlooking the foyer shattered inward, showering the marble floor with jewel-toned shards. Through the jagged opening, Damien could see the night sky blazing with unnatural aurora, ribbons of sickly green and purple light writhing across the darkness. The moon, nearly full, appeared distorted, its surface marred by what looked like spreading cracks of absolute blackness. "The boundary wards are failing," Sebastian reported, checking a series of crystalline monitors embedded in the wall. "Something is attempting to penetrate the estate defenses from multiple points simultaneously." "Elven attack?" Isabella questioned, drawing a slender blade from within her coat. "No," Damien said with certainty, his senses extended to their limits. "This is something else." The main doors burst open, admitting a group of guards half carrying Elias between them. The vampire's normally immaculate appearance was disheveled, his clothing torn and stained with what looked like ash rather than blood. "The forest," he gasped as they lowered him to a chair. "It's changing. Trees turning to crystal, then crumbling to nothing. Animals fleeing or disappearing entirely when the shadows touch them." Damien strode to the shattered window, scanning the grounds. The perfectly manicured gardens immediately surrounding the mansion remained intact, protected by the estate's ancient wards. Beyond them, however, the forest was transforming before his eyes. Trees crystallized with an audible tinkling sound, their forms becoming translucent before disintegrating into dust, and moving through the destruction, barely visible except as deeper patches of darkness within the night, were sinuous shapes that seemed to devour light itself. "The void doesn't wait for the full alignment," Damien realized aloud. "The existing seals have deteriorated too far." Another violent tremor shook the building. From somewhere deep below came the sound of stone cracking. The foundations, Sebastian warned. The estate sits upon one of the original seal points. Damien's mind worked rapidly, connecting pieces of lore, memory, and intuition. The 7 seal points. Blackwood Estate was built upon one deliberately, by my ancestors. The Moon Shadow realm must contain another. The stone circle in Thornwood, Isabella suggested. A third? Presumably, Damien agreed. All 7 would form a perfect septogram around the region, containing the weakest point in the barrier between realms. A guard burst in from the eastern corridor. "My lord, intruders breaching the east wing." "Elven?" Damien demanded. "No, sir. I don't know what they are." The guard's voice held barely controlled panic. "They look like shadows, but solid. They touched Reardon and he just ceased to exist. Not dust, not ash. Simply gone. Void manifestations," Sebastian whispered, fear evident even in his scholarly voice. "Physical embodiments of non-existence." Damien made his decision instantly. Evacuate the human staff to the sanctuary chamber. Activate the blood-locked gates. Isabella, contact the Conclave. Tell them the void breaches ahead of the alignment. "And you?" she asked, already moving to obey. "I'm going to the east wing," he replied grimly. "Sebastian, bring the arc-light weapon from the armory." As his household mobilized with practiced efficiency, despite their fear, Damien moved swiftly through the corridors toward the disturbance. The air grew noticeably colder as he approached, frost forming on the ancient wood paneling. His breath fogged before him, unusual for a vampire who generated little body heat. He rounded a corner and stopped abruptly. The East Wing gallery, lined with portraits of his ancestors, had been transformed. The paintings were crystallizing, their subjects appearing to scream in silent agony as their images fragmented and dissolved. The floor beneath was covered in a layer of fine, glittering dust, all that remained of centuries of history, and moving among the destruction were 3 figures, exactly matching the entity from Lyra's memory. Humanoid but wrong, their proportions slightly off, their movements too fluid. Their skin absorbed light, creating pockets of absolute darkness around them. Where they touched the walls or furniture, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly smooth divots of nothingness. One sensed his presence and turned. Its face, if it could be called that, was featureless except for those terrible void-like eyes, and a mouth that opened to reveal not teeth or tongue, but a miniature version of the distorted night sky he'd seen outside, complete with writhing aurora and fracturing moon. "Damien Blackwood," it said, its voice like shards of ice scraping together. "Last of the Northern Alpha bloodline. Guardian of the First Seal." Damien held his ground, though every instinct screamed to retreat from this abomination. "You know me, it seems, yet I don't recall making your acquaintance." The thing's mouth stretched in a parody of a smile. "We have met many times, across many cycles. You wear different flesh, different names, but the essence remains, always standing at the gate, always resisting the inevitable. If we've done this dance before, you know how it ends," Damien replied, projecting confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Yes, with your failure." The creature gestured around at the dissolving gallery. "The cycle nears completion. The seals weaken, the bloodlines diminish. This time there will be no renewal." Sebastian appeared at Damien's side, bearing an ancient weapon that resembled a cross between a sword and a scepter. Its crystalline blade emitted pure white light that caused the void entities to recoil slightly. "The Arclight," the lead entity hissed, sounding almost amused. "A relic of the first sealing, potent but limited. It cannot save you when the final star aligns." "Perhaps not alone," came a new voice from behind Damien. He turned to find Lyra standing in the corridor, no longer in her elven robes, but dressed for battle in armor that seemed crafted from living moonlight. At her side hung a sword, whose blade appeared to be forged from the same material as the Arclight. "Princess Moonshadow," the void entity said, its voice containing something like satisfaction. "The half-blood key. How convenient that you deliver yourself to us." "I deliver nothing but your banishment," Lyra replied. her violet eyes blazing with inner light as she drew her sword. Without warning, all three entities moved at once, flowing across the room with impossible speed. Damien raised the arclight, its power vibrating through his arms as it connected with the lead entity. Light exploded at the point of contact, driving the creature back with a sound like reality tearing. Lyra engaged the other two, her sword leaving trails of moonlight as it sliced through the darkness. Where it touched the entities, their substance seemed to solidify momentarily, becoming vulnerable. "Their physical forms can be dispersed," she called to Damien, "but only temporarily." As they fought, the very fabric of the mansion seemed to warp around them. Walls rippled like water, floors tilted at impossible angles before snapping back. The laws of physics themselves appeared to falter in the presence of these fragments of non-existence. Damien drove the arclight through what passed for the lead entity's chest. Instead of blood or ichor, a burst of what looked like miniature stars exploded outward, momentarily illuminating the entire wing with blinding light. The creature shrieked, a sound that bypassed the ears entirely and resonated directly in the mind, and collapsed into a puddle of oily darkness that quickly evaporated. Lyra dispatched one of her opponents with similar efficiency, but the third entity managed to grasp her arm. Where it touched, her armor crystallized and began to crumble. She cried out in pain, slashing desperately at the creature with her sword. Damien moved without thinking, driving the arclight through the entity from behind. The creature arched backward, releasing Lyra as its form destabilized and dissolved into nothingness. In the sudden silence that followed, Damien and Lyra stood facing each other, both breathing heavily despite his lack of physiological need to do so. Her left arm was bare, where the armor had disintegrated, the skin beneath unnaturally pale but unharmed. "How did you get in?" he demanded, not lowering the arclight. "The estate is warded against unauthorized entry, particularly elven." "I was already here," Lyra replied, sheathing her sword. "I've been here since yesterday, hidden in the old servants' passages, watching, waiting." "For what?" "For this." She gestured to the destruction around them. "The first incursion. Proof that the void doesn't wait for the perfect alignment this time. It's stronger, more desperate." She met his eyes directly. "And now you've seen its true form, the enemy manipulating our peoples for millennia." Before Damien could respond, another violent tremor shook the mansion, this one sustained and more powerful than any previous. Cracks spread across the ceiling, raining plaster and wood onto the already devastated gallery floor. "The seal beneath your estate fractures," Lyra said urgently. "Once it fails completely, nothing will stop the void from manifesting fully in this realm." "What do you propose?" Damien asked, his mind already calculating possibilities and contingencies. "The original plan," Lyra said, "the one our ancestors formed before the betrayal. Unite the 7 bloodlines at the 7 seal points. Renew the barriers with freely given power. And I'm supposed to trust Azrael Moonshadow after seeing how he betrayed my clan?" "You saw my memories," Lyra said, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Then you know my father was manipulated just as yours was. The Void's greatest weapon has always been deception, turning allies against each other." Another tremor, violent enough to throw them both off balance. The mansion's very foundations seemed to groan in protest. "We have no time for ancient grudges," Lyra insisted. "The 7 stars nearly align. 5 days remain at most. Without the united power of the 7 bloodlines, the seals will fail completely." "And the 7 bloodlines are? Vampire, elf, werewolf, fae, elemental, human and dragon," Lyra recited. "Each with their particular power, each essential to the sealing." Damien weighed his options rapidly. The immediate threat was undeniable. The void entities had breached his strongest defenses with alarming ease. Yet centuries of ingrained caution warned against trusting too quickly, especially a moon shadow. "My father waits at the edge of your domain with representatives from the other bloodlines," Lyra continued. We need only your consent to begin preparations for the renewal ritual." As if to punctuate her plea, the mansion shuddered again. From below came the unmistakable sound of ancient stone cracking. "The seal fails," Sebastian warned, checking the monitoring crystals embedded in his wrist guard. "We have hours at most." Damien made his decision. "Tell your father I will meet with him," he told Lyra. "But I set the terms. The meeting happens in neutral territory, the stone circle where we met before." Relief washed across Lyra's face. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet," Damien cautioned. "I haven't agreed to anything beyond a meeting, and I want answers about what really happened 3 centuries ago." "You'll have them," Lyra promised. "But first, we need to evacuate this estate. The seal beneath cannot be repaired until the alignment. It can only be contained temporarily. This place will become a battleground within hours." As if in response to her words, a deafening crack echoed from the depths of the estate. The floor beneath them tilted sharply, furniture sliding across the room to crash against the far wall. Through the broken windows, Damien could see the gardens transforming as the forest had, crystallizing, then disintegrating into nothing. The protective wards were failing. "Too late," Sebastian whispered. "The seal has broken." A column of absolute darkness erupted from the center of the estate, punching through floors and ceilings as it reached skyward. Where it touched, matter simply ceased to exist, leaving perfectly cylindrical voids through the mansion's structure. The darkness spread outward like spilled ink, consuming everything in its path. "We need to go," Lyra urged, grabbing Damien's arm. "Now!" As they turned to flee, a figure materialized in the doorway, elegant, regal, and radiating cold power. Seraphina Moonshadow stood before them, her perfect features arranged in an expression of sorrowful determination. "Sister," Lyra whispered, her hand moving to her sword hilt. "Hello, little half-breed," Seraphina replied, her voice musical despite its cruelty. "I see you've found your vampire ally as planned. How convenient for us all." Damien raised the arc light, its glow illuminating Seraphina's flawless features. "You were in Lyra's memory. You helped frame my clan, orchestrated the betrayal." "Did I?" Seraphina's smile was chilling. "Or is that what my clever sister wants you to believe?" She stepped forward, seemingly unconcerned by the spreading darkness behind them or the weapon in Damien's hand. "Tell me, vampire. Did she show you how she was created? Did she reveal her true parentage?" Confusion flickered across Damien's face. Beside him, Lyra had gone utterly still. "No," Seraphina continued, clearly enjoying their reaction. "How interesting that she omitted that crucial detail. Perhaps you should ask her who her mother really was." She glanced at the arclight. "Or why she, alone of all elven kind, can touch that weapon without burning." The mansion shuddered violently again. The column of darkness had expanded to consume nearly half the east wing and was growing rapidly. "We don't have time for your manipulations," Lyra said through gritted teeth. "The seal has broken. The void manifests." "Yes," Seraphina agreed, with strange satisfaction. "Everything proceeds exactly as it should." She fixed her gaze on Damien. "The time has come to choose sides. Alpha of the North. The old world ends. The question is whether you wish to perish with it or rule what rises from its ashes." Before either could respond, Seraphina raised her hand. The air around it distorted, darkening in a way horrifically similar to the void entities they had just fought. "You've been consorting with the void," Damien realized aloud. "You've become its vessel." Seraphina's perfect face split in a terrible smile that stretched too wide, revealing glimpses of that same star-filled darkness they had seen in the void entity's mouth. "Not its vessel, vampire, its architect, its evolution, its future." She thrust her hand forward. A wave of pure darkness erupted from her palm, racing toward them with the speed of thought. The arc-light blazed in Damien's hand as he hurled himself in front of Lyra, meeting Seraphina's darkness with ancient light. The collision released a shockwave that blasted through the disintegrating mansion, temporarily halting the void's expansion. Pain seared through Damien's arms as conflicting energies battled for dominance, threatening to tear him apart at a molecular level. "Run!" he commanded Lyra, his voice strained with effort. Instead, she pressed her hand against his shoulder, her touch sending a surge of moonlight energy through him. The arclight responded, its crystalline blade elongating and burning brighter. "Together," she said, her voice resonating with power. "It's the only way." Seraphina's laughter echoed unnaturally, seeming to come from everywhere at once. How touching! The vampire and the half-breed, united in their final moments. Her form flickered, darkness bleeding through her elven appearance like ink through parchment. "Did you never wonder, Damien, why you felt compelled to save her from the flames? Why, after centuries of isolation, you risked everything for a stranger?" The darkness pressed harder, gaining ground despite their combined strength. The mansion groaned around them, reality itself buckling under the strain of conflicting forces. "A blood calls to blood," Seraphina continued relentlessly. "Tell him, sister, tell him who your mother was." Lyra's grip on Damien's shoulder tightened. "This isn't the time. Your mother was Elise Blackwood," Seraphina declared triumphantly. "Alaric's daughter, the vampire princess who disappeared during the betrayal." The revelation hit Damien like a physical blow. Elise, his half-sister, presumed killed in the massacre. The missing piece in the tapestry of betrayal. "Lies," he growled, though uncertainty crept into his voice. "Search your instincts," Seraphina pressed. "Why does she smell familiar? Why can she touch the arclight without burning? Elven and vampire blood combined, the ultimate abomination, but also the key to unlocking power beyond imagining." The darkness surged forward again, consuming more of the room. Behind them, Sebastian had opened a portal, a desperate emergency measure that would collapse within moments. "My lord, we must go," he called urgently. Damien held his ground, mind racing. If what Seraphina said was true, if Lyra carried both bloodlines. "The ritual requires 7 bloodlines," he realized aloud. "But you're trying to create something different, something that bypasses the need for cooperation." "Always so clever." Seraphina's voice had changed, harmonics of something ancient and terrible resonating beneath her words. "The void doesn't seek destruction, vampire. It seeks evolution. Transformation. The 7 realms separated are weak, vulnerable, combined under proper guidance." Her smile stretched impossibly wide. "Godhood awaits." With a sudden surge, her darkness overwhelmed the arclight's barrier. Tendrils of non-existence wrapped around Damien's arm, crystallizing his flesh before beginning to dissolve it into nothingness. Lyra reacted instantly, her sword slashing through the darkness. Where moonlight metal met void, reality screamed, an actual sound that shattered the remaining windows and cracked the stone walls. Seraphina hissed in pain, momentarily retreating. "The portal now!" Lyra shouted, dragging Damien toward the shimmering gateway Sebastian had created. They tumbled through just as the mansion's structure finally surrendered to the void. The portal collapsed behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving them sprawled on dew-dampened grass beneath star-filled skies. Damien looked down at his arm. Where the void had touched, crystalline patterns spread beneath his skin, a cold numbness following in their wake. Not the agony he had expected, but something almost worse, the absence of sensation altogether. They had emerged at the stone circle, he realized. All around them, figures waited in tense anticipation, representatives of the remaining bloodlines. And at their center stood Azrael Moonshadow, his ageless face grave as he watched his youngest daughter help his ancient enemy to his feet. "You were right," Damien said without preamble. "The void doesn't wait for the perfect alignment." "And Seraphina?" Azrael asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "Gone," Lyra answered, unable to meet her father's eyes. "Consumed by the void, or become one with it," I can't tell which. Both, I suspect, Azriel said softly. The signs were there for centuries. I refused to see them. As you refused to see the truth about the betrayal, Damien challenged, the pain in his arm fueling his anger. As you refused to acknowledge your own half-vampire daughter. A ripple of shock passed through the assembled representatives. Azriel remained impassive, though something like ancient sorrow flickered in his eyes. I have lived 15,000 years, vampire. My mistakes would fill volumes. He straightened, authority reasserting itself in his posture. But now we face extinction. The seal beneath your estate has failed completely, the others weakened by the hour. We have perhaps 3 days before the alignment, not 5 as we believed. A tall woman with gleaming bronze skin stepped forward, the elemental representative, her hair moving like flames despite the still night air. The ritual requires 7 bloodlines at 7 locations simultaneously, she said. With one seal already broken, is this still possible? Not as originally designed, Azriel admitted, but there may be another way. All eyes turned to Lyra, who stood silently beside Damien, her hand unconsciously resting on his uninjured arm. The dual bloodline, whispered a massive, bearded man who could only be the werewolf Alpha. The impossible child. Is it true? Yes, Lyra finally answered, her voice steady despite the weight of revelation. My mother was Elise Blackwood. She didn't die in the betrayal. She was taken, saved or captured, depending on your perspective. She and my father... She glanced at Azriel, who had the grace to look discomfited. Their union was initially political, a desperate attempt to salvage something from the broken alliance. But they fell in love, added an ethereal silver-haired woman, the Fey Queen, her gossamer wings iridescent in the moonlight. I remember. I was there when they took their vows in secret, when both our realms would have executed them for such heresy. Damien absorbed this information with growing astonishment. His half-sister, alive all this time, and mother to this extraordinary woman who had risked everything to reveal the truth. Where is she now? He asked. Where is Elise? Pain crossed both Azriel's and Lyra's faces. She died, Azriel said softly. Not in childbirth, as the official records state, but in defense of our realm, when the Void first attempted to use Seraphina as a vessel. She gave her life to buy us time. Time I've squandered with pride and inaction. The crystalline patterns had spread further up Damien's arm, nearly reaching his shoulder. He could feel his immortal body fighting the intrusion, but it was a losing battle. The Void corruption would eventually reach his heart. We're wasting what little time remains, he said grimly. What is this alternative ritual you propose, Azriel? The elven High Lord gestured, and his attendants brought forward an ancient stone chest. When opened, it revealed 7 crystalline objects similar to the Arclight, but smaller and varied in color. The keys of sealing, Azriel explained, crafted at the First Conquered when the 7 realms initially contained the Void, each attuned to a specific bloodline. These were thought lost millennia ago, said a scholarly-looking human woman, unexpectedly young to be representing the most numerous but magically weakest of the bloodlines. Hidden, Azriel corrected, against exactly this possibility. The final representative, a slight, golden-eyed man with scaled patterns visible on his exposed skin, leaned forward with interest. The dragon emissary rarely spoke, but when he did, all listened. These will not be sufficient, he said, his voice carrying the hint of smoke, not with one seal already broken. No, Azriel agreed, which is why we need Lyra and Damien. The plan unfolded with brutal simplicity. While representatives of 5 bloodlines would reinforce the remaining seals with their keys, Damien and Lyra would journey to the center point, the heart of the Void incursion where Blackwood Estate had once stood. There, using their combined heritage and the 2 most powerful keys, Vampire and Elven, they would establish a new central seal. It's a suicide mission, Isabella objected when she heard the plan. The void concentration at the broken seal will be absolute. Nothing survives there. Nothing purely of one realm, Asriel corrected, but someone of two bloodlines, carrying two keys, might just survive long enough to complete the ritual, Lyra finished. Damien looked down at his arm, now crystallized to the shoulder. I'm already marked by the void. My time is limited regardless. Preparations moved with desperate efficiency. The 5 representatives departed for their designated seal points with their keys and attendants. Elias coordinated the evacuation of nearby human settlements, though many had already been consumed by the spreading void distortion. As dawn approached, Damien found himself alone with Lyra at the edge of the stone circle, watching the unnatural aurora writhing across the sky. The crystalline corruption had stopped spreading, but remained a constant, cold presence, a reminder of his mortality despite 5 centuries of near invincibility. You knew who I was from the beginning, he said, not a question, but a statement. Lyra nodded. My mother spoke of you often, her beloved half-brother, the diplomat who tried to prevent war between their peoples. Yet you said nothing when I rescued you. Would you have believed me? She challenged. Or would you have assumed it was another manipulation? Damien couldn't argue with her logic. Your mother. Was she happy in the time she had? Lyra's expression softened. Yes. Despite everything, despite the secrecy and danger, she was loved by my father, by me. She touched his crystallized arm gently. She wanted to contact you many times. The politics of our realms made it impossible. And now here we are, Damien said, about to die together to save realms that would have executed both of us for existing not long ago. Poetic, isn't it? Lyra's smile held genuine warmth despite the grim circumstances. Though I prefer to think we might succeed and survive. Optimism in the face of certain doom, Damien remarked dryly. You definitely inherited that from your mother. The moment of connection was interrupted by Asriel's approach. He carried 2 crystalline keys, one midnight blue, one blood red, on a cushion of woven moonlight. It's time, he said simply. The journey to what had been Blackwood Estate took less than an hour, though it felt like traversing another world entirely. The landscape grew increasingly distorted the closer they came to the broken seal. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, frozen in crystalline stasis before crumbling into nothing. The ground itself buckled and warped, patches of absolute darkness interspersed with areas of blinding prismatic light where reality itself seemed to be shattering. And at the center where the mansion had stood now yawned a perfect circle of nothingness, not darkness, but the complete absence of anything, a hole in existence itself. They stood at its edge, the keys growing warm in their hands as they activated in proximity to their task. Damien could feel his key responding to his bloodline, pulsing in time with his heartbeat. Once we begin, there's no turning back, Lyra said, her violet eyes meeting his. The void will be drawn to us immediately. Damien nodded. I've lived 5 centuries, most of it in shadows and regret. This, at least, has purpose. Such nobility. Came a familiar, melodic voice from behind them. It would be touching if it weren't so utterly futile. They turned to find Seraphina standing there, or something wearing Seraphina's form. Her perfect beauty remained, but her eyes had become pools of swirling void, and darkness moved beneath her skin like living shadow. Sister, Lyra acknowledged grimly. That term no longer applies, the thing that had been Seraphina replied. I am become something greater, the first of a new existence. And you, she looked at Damien, with your arm already transforming, are halfway to joining me. What do you want? Damien demanded, positioning himself between this abomination and Lyra. To offer an alternative to your pointless sacrifice, she said reasonably. The old cycle needn't repeat. The void isn't destruction, it's transformation, evolution. Become its vessels willingly and shape what comes after. For a moment, just a moment, Damien felt the pull of her words. The crystallization in his arm seemed to resonate with her presence, whispering seductive possibilities. power beyond imagining, existence beyond the limitations of separate realms. Lyra's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. The touch anchored him, reminding him of connections that mattered more than power. "We decline," he said simply. Seraphina's beautiful face contorted with rage. "Then perish with the old world." She thrust both hands forward, darkness erupting from her palms like solid matter. Damien and Lyra moved as one, their keys raised in unison. Light blazed from the crystalline objects, midnight blue and blood red combining into a royal purple barrier that met Seraphina's darkness. "The ritual," Asriel called from where he maintained a protective circle around them. "Complete it now." Still holding hands, they turned toward the void aperture. The keys pulled toward each other, drawn by forces older than any living being. As they touched, reality itself seemed to hold its breath. "Blood of two realms," Lyra began the incantation, her voice carrying power beyond her years. "Guardians of the gate," Damien continued, the words coming to him as if remembered from another lifetime. Together, they completed the ritual phrase, "We stand between worlds, between light and darkness, between existence and void. With freely given power, we seal the breach." The keys flared blindingly bright, merging into a single object, a crystalline star that pulsed with combined energies of vampire and elf, blood and starlight. It rose from their hands, hovering over the void aperture. Behind them, Seraphina screamed in fury and desperation, her darkness battering against Asriel's protective circle. "You don't understand what you're rejecting." The star descended into the void, carrying with it the essence of both Damien and Lyra, their power, their memories, their very life force. Damien felt himself weakening, the immortal energy that had sustained him for centuries flowing into the sealing ritual. Beside him, Lyra swayed but remained standing, her hand still clasping his, her determination unbroken. The void rippled, resisting their power. For a terrible moment, it seemed the ritual would fail. "It needs more," Lyra gasped. "More than we can give." "Then take all of me," Damien decided, stepping forward to the very edge of existence. The crystallization that had spread from his arm suddenly accelerated, covering his torso, climbing toward his throat. But rather than surrendering to it, he channeled it, using the void's own power against itself. "Damien, no!" Lyra cried, understanding his intent. He turned to her one last time, memorizing her face, this extraordinary woman who had changed everything in the span of a week. "Tell the story better this time," he said softly. "No more betrayals. No more ancient grudges." With those words, he stepped into the void, his crystallized body becoming a conduit between existence and nothingness. Pain beyond description engulfed him, but he maintained his purpose, directing the sealing energy precisely where it was needed. The void contracted violently, trying to expel this intrusion. Damien felt himself dissolving, his consciousness fragmenting. The last thing he heard was Lyra screaming his name, her voice carrying all the grief of both their bloodlines. Then darkness, light, impossible light, filtering through closed eyelids. Damien opened his eyes to find himself lying on a bed of soft grass within the stone circle. Above him, the sky was ordinary blue, no trace of the unnatural aurora remaining. His body felt strange, lighter somehow, yet more substantial. "Welcome back," said a familiar voice. He turned his head to see Lyra sitting beside him, her expression a complex mixture of joy and lingering sorrow. Behind her stood Asriel and representatives from all 7 bloodlines, their faces reflecting varying degrees of astonishment. "How?" Damien managed, his voice rough. "7 bloodlines, freely giving," Lyra explained, helping him sit up. "When you sacrificed yourself to complete the seal, it created a resonance. The other seal points amplified it. The void was not just contained, but pushed back entirely. And Seraphina?" "Gone," Asriel answered, his ancient eyes showing the full weight of that loss despite her betrayal. "Consumed by her own darkness when the seal's re-established." Damien looked down at himself, expecting to see crystalline corruption. Instead, his arm was whole, though marked with intricate patterns like luminous scars where the void had touched him. "You've been changed," Lyra said softly. "We all have, in ways we're only beginning to understand. The ritual didn't just renew the old barriers, it transformed them, and us." "The Concordat has been rewritten," announced the Fey Queen, stepping forward. "Not by politicians or rulers, but by the sacrifice and redemption we witnessed. The Seven Realms remain separate, but connected in ways that can never be severed again." Damien stood shakily, accepting Lyra's supportive arm. The world around him seemed more vivid, more real than it had in centuries, colors brighter, sounds clearer, even the air tasting sweeter in his lungs. "Blackwood Estate?" he asked. "Restored," Sebastian answered from nearby, looking equally astonished. "But changed, like everything within the seal radius. It exists simultaneously in multiple realms now, a nexus point, rather than belonging exclusively to any single world." Over the following days, as strength returned and understanding grew, the full implications of what had happened became clearer. The void had been sealed away more completely than ever before, the barriers between realms transformed into permeable membranes rather than absolute divisions. The Seven Bloodlines had established a new council, headquartered at the transformed Blackwood Estate, with Damien and Lyra as its first joint leaders. 1 month after what was already being called the Convergence, Damien stood on the balcony of his restored mansion, watching representatives from all 7 realms mingling in the gardens below. The estate had become exactly what his ancestors had originally intended, a nexus of diplomacy, understanding, and alliance. Lyra joined him, radiant in formal attire that honored both her bloodlines. "Having second thoughts about our new role?" she asked lightly. "Merely contemplating how quickly the wheel turns," he replied. "From mortal enemies to allies in the span of a single alignment." "And what are we now?" she asked, her hand finding his, their fingers intertwining as naturally as breathing. Damien looked down at their joined hands, his marked with luminous void scars, hers gleaming subtly with moonlight beneath her skin. Different, yet harmonious. Separate bloodlines, united. "We are what comes next," he said simply, "the bridge between what was and what could be." Above them 7 stars shone with unusual brightness, no longer harbingers of doom, but beacons of a new age. The ancient game had ended. What followed would be written not by manipulation and betrayal, but by the truth they had discovered in each other, that even the oldest enmities could transform into something unexpectedly beautiful. And in that transformation lay hope for all the realms, now and for 1,000 years to come.